our next Eco Chat. Tonight, we're going to be talking about food. And we're starting this right off the bat with food as an important topic because the thing about being human is that every day you have to feed yourself at least 3 times a day, over and over and over again for the rest of your life. So making decisions about your food and what you're eating and what you're buying is a pretty major factor for the impact that you're having on the earth. So I couldn't think of anybody better to talk to about food than my friend Amanda. Amanda is an exceptionally busy working mom who's just almost impossible to get her to record this because she has so much going on. Yet with everything that she has going on, I've always really admired that she's always takes the time to be intentional about what she's eating and the food that she buys and the food that she feeds her child and her family. And that goes way back to early in our friendship when we were both making changes to our diet and the food that we are consuming, and as a part of kind of the life that we wanted to live and the world that we wanted to see. So, hi, Amanda.
Hi.
Well, let's just start out by, and I was trying to think back in the day. I remember as part of why I wanted to do the Eco Chats is because I didn't just one day wake up and just change my whole life to live more sustainably. It happened in these little kind of fits and starts. And then I remember specifically, like for a while, probably a couple of years, being like, I really need to do the whole switch to like more organic food or whatever, do the research and figure all that stuff out. And it took a little while before I don't know if I had like the time or what the impetus was, but I finally decided to finally invest a little bit of time and energy into figuring that out. At that time, it was a little harder. I feel like it's so much easier now. But back then, I feel like I had to do some research. I think we talked a lot about it, just seeing what other friends were doing, asking them about it. Very influenced by my friend's mother from very young age. I remember going over to their house and they had like a lot of brands I wasn't familiar with or like types of food I wasn't familiar with, which now I recognize was like a much more sustainable food that they were eating and that they had in their household. So thinking back, I can't remember exactly what it was that got me started, but I thought it would just start us out with just like, what does organic mean? And why does it matter when it comes to the food that we're buying and consuming? Organic just means that food is grown without the use of synthetic chemicals, which can include pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, and does not contain genetically modified organisms. So organic food is not just trendy. I think that's kind of the vibe that a lot of people have, or that's a little like, there's a little holier than thou kind of obnoxious quality to sort of, oh, I'm only going to eat organic food. But it's also, I always want to touch on Eco Chats that a lot of ways to live sustainably or suggestions to live more sustainably or to reduce your footprint aren't really accessible to all people of all incomes or backgrounds. And so I think that's important to touch on, that some of these things really are out of reach for people who live in food deserts or people who don't have an extra dollar to spend to buy organic, or don't have the time or the energy or the space to do this type of research or make these different decisions. They're just trying to survive. So I just want to start out the Eco Chat. I think most of our Eco Chats are going to have to recognize that right up at the top, that there's some privilege in this. But I do think that means that the onus is on those who can make those different decisions to do so, because ultimately the larger consumer footprints impact lower income populations more. And we will have a Tending the Garden program on that later this month. So organic food does cost a little bit more because it actually does cost more to produce. The chemicals that we're using have developed because they make food growing more efficient, or you can grow more on a smaller piece of land, that kind of thing. But it has its own cost. You have nutrient stripped topsoil, depletion of wildlife, pollinators, which we need to produce food, pollution. So when you look at, there's like a dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. There's actually hundreds of dead zones in our oceans, but that one specifically is from runoff, agricultural runoff of fertilizer and other chemicals into the Mississippi River. And then that from the Midwest. So you have all those farms in the Midwest. That excess fertilizer and all that is running off into the Mississippi River, draining into the Gulf of Mexico, and creating a low oxygen zone where things can't live. So that's like a kind of a nationwide example. That's interesting that like I have cousins in Illinois who are farmers that, some of the stuff that the chemicals that they're putting in their fields is ending up in the Gulf of Mexico, impacting wildlife and other life. I think it's the same kind of concept why they ask that you don't blow or hose your grass clippings into the sewers in your own home, is because all of that like goes into the water system and then causes like algae blooms. There's lots of rivers and pollution issues in Oklahoma in particular. The Sierra Club keeps track of those if you're interested. And actually an article from July that I just found shows that 52% of Oklahoma rivers are too polluted to swim in, due in large part to agricultural runoff. So this is a global problem. It's a national problem, and it's a problem here in Oklahoma for sure. Our tax dollars go to clean up those messes. Farmers' health and fertility are really impacted by the use of those chemicals, including surrounding communities. Organic food is healthier and it tastes better. Chefs used it before it became kind of more of like a well-known, accessible mainstream thing, just because it makes your food taste better. And organic food has 40% more antioxidants and flavonoids. And organic milk has even shown to have 90% more antioxidants than regular milk. So when you look at like why this is a little bit, it's really at this point only a little bit more expensive. It's really not. I feel like since I started this like 15 years ago, their gap used to be much bigger. Now it's much smaller, I would say, in price. But I always considered it an investment. I'm paying like a little bit, maybe 50 cents more today to save on medical bills that I could have much larger in the future. And then something I've noticed even just in the last couple of years, I switched my diet because I had some food sensitivities that I discovered. One of which is to corn and one is to gluten. And I noticed a really strong difference in reactions based on whether it's like an organic wheat flour as opposed to like a really highly processed or refined wheat flour. I'll have like a very different response. Same with corn. So Amanda, what do you remember from back when you first decided to switch over, pay more attention to the food that you were buying?
I did a lot of research on GMOs, I remember. And I even wrote a little bit about it in Green, Oklahoma. And
I forgot you did that.
I remember being a little bit overwhelmed by the controversy, and just, how how much there was about it, kind of like what you were alluding to, that it's not, it's not just immediately. I mean, many people want to think GMOs bad, pesticides bad, let's not eat them. But there's a lot of fierce advocates and farmers that think GMOs are good, or that they've done good things because, for example, the fact that we're able to produce a lot more crops, or we're able to feed populations with a smaller amount of land. And so, like, maybe it has some good outcomes too. Like, it's not so easy to say, is it immediately good or bad? But yes, like you mentioned, there are huge costs, like you mentioned. So, but that was probably the most surprising thing to me. That, I mean, I just assumed that there would be clear cut. Everyone would agree GMOs are bad, but it wasn't quite so simple when you dove into the research.
Mhm.
And of course, it mattered who funded the research, of course. So I started looking at that first thing.
Yeah, I think my cousin, who's a farmer, when I first started looking into this, I would ask him his opinion, and he was like, "Well, I think this is, the way that we're doing things is better." I think he's using seed from Monsanto or whatever, and it's more resistant to pests, so it's less work for him. There were a lot. I mean, there are reasons that they developed these uses for these chemicals in the first place, but now we are seeing there's so much cost to it, to our environment, to our communities, to the nutrients for food. But it is also, Americans are a little spoiled because other countries spend more on their food overall, but so we have an expectation of wanting cheap food, but there's a cost to that. So what was it that made you, was it that research that you did, or what was it that made you want to switch? Or what gave you the motivation to switch?
Well, in general, it was my health. I
Mhm.
started having lots of chronic debilitating pain, and um, a lot of doctors. I think I saw every specialist there was. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I saw a lot of specialists, and no one seemed to have an answer. So when I dove, I started reading on my own, of course. When no one gives you an answer to explain your pain, you, out of desperation, you start doing your own research. And I dove into medical journal articles, and I dove into books, and a lot of things led back to food and to diet, and kind of the whole thing, you are what you eat. A lot of books and articles led back to this. And I was shocked to learn that, for example, a lot of, in medical school, doctors don't necessarily, like, nutrition is an optional course. Like, doctors don't have to take that. And that there's a lot of health outcomes, of course, tied to a poor American diet. A lot of the poor American outcomes that we have in the obesity epidemic tied to poor American diet. And so, and of course, organic food comes up in those conversations, and GMOs and processed foods and things like that. So that's where it originally started. And it's just been a journey ever since then.
Yeah. So did it happen all at once that you made those changes, or was it kind of just a little bit at a time?
No, it was definitely a little bit at a time, because it's really overwhelming. Because if anyone has ever tried to pick up a book about food, I mean, there's 5,000 different opinions about food. And I don't like the word diet, because I think there's a lot of negative connotation associated with it. But you can't really dive into food books without coming up across the word diet, or like just whatever kind of food you eat. Um, there, there's just so many different opinions, and the research is not conclusive about There's differing opinions medically wise on what is the right kind of food to eat. And so it gets a little overwhelming. And so there would be times where like I would be like really stringent and really militant and really religious about a certain diet. Like I did a bunch of testing once and figured out that I was um, sensitive to all of these different types of food, and that I needed to go all organic on all of these specific types of food. And I was really militant about it, about clean eating and following this very specific diet. And then it would just become um, sometimes I couldn't figure out, well, was this actually helping my pain? Was it not? There were too many things I was trying to keep track of. It would get a little overwhelming. And so sometimes I would then try something else because it wasn't having the results that I wanted. And so it was a little bit at a time, although I was much better at it and much more um, strict and uh, stringent about my diet pre-parenting than I was post-parenting. But pre-child and post-child looked a little different. My husband and I also faced a lot of infertility, and so that was also something that motivated looking at clean eating and, can diet impact fertility, and whether we eat organic or not. And so, and then there was also sometimes there would also be those situations where there'd be, there were different times over the past 2 decades when I really started the journey, probably about 15 years ago, I would say, where financially I was at different places in my life where I could afford, because it is more expensive to buy organically. So sometimes I would make the choice like, can I really afford to buy these more expensive organic items or not? And having to make that decision, which items should I spend that extra dollar on, or which items, like, is the organic avocados better than the organic tomatoes, or can I buy the non-organic avocados, but I should go ahead and splurge on the organic tomatoes? So it was trying to figure out, like, are there some I should always buy organic, some I shouldn't? So sometimes I was able to afford and buy everything organic, and sometimes I'd have to scale back. So I would definitely say overall, it was a little at a time. Sometimes I was able to go all in, and then sometimes I had to pull back, and sometimes I was able to go back all in. It was a little bit of maybe a roller coaster.
Yeah, I think it's super easy to get overwhelmed. I remember having periods where because at first I think I was just like trying to be all in, and same thing. Like I think I had less responsibilities back then, and I seemed to have more time and energy to do all that research and get the library books and whatever. And then I remember getting like just really exhausted, like reading labels, and then what about, like, they also say buy local and seasonal food. So then you're also like more also processing like, okay, is it better to do if it's local but it's not organic? Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, what is the season for this food that I want? There was just like, for people who maybe have a little bit of anxiety and perfectionism and overthinking, that whole thing can get really overwhelming. And I think I remember we were both relieved when Natural Grocers came into Norman, because they have really strict guidelines for the food that they will sell. And so I remember us having that conversation of like being relieved, because it just reduced that whole grocery store spiral of like having to like check everything that we were getting to check the label and all the things we were supposed to be looking for and making those decisions. They were already made for us. So That
Yes.
is another privilege and advantage if you live in certain communities where that's available. Um, I think also, I was going to recommend the environmental working groups, the Dirty Dozen
Yes.
and the Clean 15 is usually the place where people start.
Yes.
The Dirty Dozen are the top produce that where they have found the most chemicals in the food itself. So like the number one is strawberries this year, I think. And then the Clean 15 are the ones that they found the least amount. As I was thinking about that though, that's sort of if you are there's lots of reasons to make these choices. And so if your reason is to have fewer chemicals that you are consuming yourself or exposing your family to or whatever, that's really helpful. The Clean 15 are tend to be things that have like a heart. It just is very logical. Like it's just stuff that has like a big, like a barrier, like a banana or an avocado or a papaya or a
Yes.
pineapple has like, a little armor against whatever pesticides or whatever they might be using. But that still wouldn't negate the like runoff issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like impact on like pollinators and stuff like that.
Right.
So that's something else to think about. Although I did think, with the whole like local question, I feel like there's a lot of local sweet potatoes, but they're not organic. So as I was reviewing that list or whatever, that kind of was like, oh, okay, now I know, like, I'm just going to get the local sweet potatoes and not worry about whether they're organic or not, because they're on the Clean 15. They tend to not have a lot of pesticides and chemicals in them. So what are some other, I know you said you kind of had to scale back sometimes or making those decisions. I found in the last like 10 or 15 years or so that the organic products or more natural products, which that could be a whole other conversation. And we will have one on like toiletries and stuff like that. But all that stuff is just so much more widely available now.
It
And
is.
so as demand increases, the price comes down. So I think that Aldi is my favorite place for organic food products. Have you gotten on the Aldi train? I can't remember. I know we've talked about it.
I do like Aldi's. It's just a little more out of the way, and I'm big on convenience. So I look for places that offer DoorDash delivery, or I can do pickup for often because I want to like order on an app and just drive up and pick it up.
Gotcha.
So that's like a big deal to me right now. So
Yeah.
uh,
So Aldi has, I forget what they call it, but basically like they have it's sort of the Trader Joe's model where they have their own product. It's all their own product line
uh-huh.
or something, which makes it really inexpensive. So you can get a ton of really good organic, not so good on the produce. Although I do get my organic berries there because they're very reasonably priced there. But tons of other food in their like Simply Nature line or whatever has been really amazing. And they're getting into the plant-based stuff, which is pretty awesome. So I'm so excited. They just started making a plant-based cashew milk yogurt.
Oh, good.
Very exciting for me. And that is something else to touch on. Is eating less meat is in the top 10 things that you can do to help climate change. Um, I've been vegetarian since 2007, however many years that is. But not everybody can make that commitment. Again, it is like a place of privilege to be able to make a diet choice like that. That's also gotten much easier in the last 10 years or 5 years or so. But even if you reduce the amount of meat that you're consuming. So animal agriculture produces huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions, consume massive amounts of water, and causes a lot of pollution. So to produce a single pound of beef takes 1,850 gallons of water, and it only takes 39 gallons of water per pound of vegetables. And so when we are talking about water scarcity, I know, which is a huge issue in Oklahoma, looking at the future for Oklahoma, water scarcity is a major issue. You can simply reduce the amount of meat eaten. And I found some wild information. Committing to Meatless Monday each week equates to the same reduction of emissions as cutting out 348 miles of driving.
Wow.
And then also the type of meat that you're consuming. So beef is the most by far issue. Pigs and poultry contribute about 10% of global agricultural emissions, but provide 3 times as much meat as cattle, which are responsible for 40% of emissions. And they also use less feed. So that's pretty huge. Even just making the decision to like cut out red meat or just to do one meal a week meatless can make a huge difference just on its own. Amanda, this is like a huge issue that you brought up that, of course, I didn't think about. How does this work with a child or when you have children? I know that you said that when you had kids, it was a real different situation. But what are some other, like, how do you sort of try to keep this going, or what are some of the obstacles that you faced?
Well, so convenience has become a lot more, like before I wasn't really concerned about convenience. And unfortunately, a lot of sustainability and environmental concerns, I mean, being green means being a little bit more inconvenienced often, and not taking the easiest way out, not using that plastic or not using, and I struggled with that a lot because I just wanted the quickest solution, the quickest thing that would get, my daughter to stop crying or get me so I could get to a place where I'd sleep. And so I've struggled with that a lot, and I still struggle with it. And I've struggled with a lot of guilt with some of my decisions. With food, particularly, like I mentioned, organic is still something that I prioritize, and eating the least amount of processed food as possible, staying away from as much packaging as possible, although we have incorporated more packaging into our food than I would like. But so like, for example, like I pretty much, again, given that, as you pointed out, which I appreciate, that I'm in a place where I can shop at like natural grocers, that I can make those choices about all organic food. And so like I would shop there, but natural grocers isn't as convenient. They don't provide DoorDash. They don't provide, they don't have a pickup option where I can just drive up and someone runs out to my car and places the food in my car. So I tend to go between Sprouts and Target because they have really convenient options. And they both have options now where I don't have to use their sack. Like they'll sack the groceries with my bags when they come out to the car. which is great. Target didn't have that for a long time, but so like, let's say, for example, this just happened the other day. Target was out of organic bell peppers. And I'm like, do I make a trip to National Grocers and get the bell pepper that's organic, or do I just go ahead and get the non-organic bell pepper? And I'm like, I'm just going to eat the non-organic bell pepper because I don't have time to make an extra trip just to get the non-organic bell pepper. They're hardly ever out of organic bell peppers. This was like a one-time. This may have been the first time ever that they were out of it. So, and usually I can go between Sprouts and Natural Grocers, and between the two, I'll find the organic item that I need. But sometimes I'll make the call. Another thing that comes up sometimes is, do you buy the organic eggs, or do you buy the cage-free eggs, or the free-range eggs? Some of those are two of those are USDA terms. One of those is not, like the organic version is not actually, the pasture raised, is not actually regulated by the USDA. So sometimes I'm like, which term is it again that I'm supposed to care about? Which one is the best one for the chickens? Let me remember again. I'm really tired. I've only gone on 4 hours of sleep. Am I supposed to get the organic or the pasture raised or the free range? Which one is cheaper? Sometimes I just pick the cheaper one of the four. I've done that before. And maybe I shouldn't have done that. And then I'll be like, oh, but what about the chickens? Are they being?
Because sometimes you're just like, I can't spend $7 on a dozen eggs today. This is not today.
Exactly. So I think some of those choices between convenience and because the convenience, I feel like, comes with oftentimes more packaging. And for some reason, organic foods often have extra packaging on them at the stores, which boggles my mind. Like, for example, the organic bell peppers, for some reason, are like have an extra plastic wrap around them at Target. And I'm like, why is this necessary? The non-organic ones do not have any packaging on them.
I wonder if it's it is because like they
want to keep it from touching the pesticide version.
Well, no, maybe maybe they're not genetically modified to be like pest resistant or to preserve as long, because I think that's part of the reason why they modify them, right? Is to make them so that they can be huge and pretty, but also so that they can like ship them out, right when they pick them, and then like be okay for the next 4 weeks or whatever until they get on the shelves or something like that. That's just my guess. I don't really actually know.
Yeah, well, this is often the case. The celery usually comes with packaging either way. But, cucumbers. Often organic cucumbers come with packaging versus the non-organic, I feel like. Anyway, so that's often a concern of mine, that when we are going organic, and as a parent, sorry, I lost my train of thought for a moment. But what I wanted to say is, one of the things I've done as a parent in order to be more convenient, because I used to spend tons of time in the kitchen, like preparing lots of food from scratch. And it's still important to me to prepare food from scratch because I know what's going in my food, and I can control the ingredients. I can know that it's organic. I can know that it's what type of meat is going in the food, or I can make sure we're having 1 or 2 meals a week that's vegetarian. But some of the most time-consuming part about cooking is the planning and the shopping. So we get Green Chef delivered to our house once a week, once every other week, which is a lot more money than a lot of the other, and not something everyone can afford to do, because they are all organic. They're like, their meats are organic, grass fed. They serve more vegetables than like the other brands that are out there, and everything is organic. Um, but it comes delivered, but that comes with more packaging in order to have that convenience. So I really struggle with that often. I appreciate the fact that a lot of their packaged materials are compostable, that it's cardboard, that it's not all just plastic, but still, there's still just more packaging. And the idea is to get away from all the packaging. So the convenience that we often want in our very rushed world, especially when we're juggling so many things, comes with, I think, hurts the environment, and I struggle with that.
Yeah, I think that's why I like these eco chats, because a lot of people think like, well, if I'm going to do this, like I have to be perfect about it and very militant about it, or people are going to judge me, or there's like a lot of that kind of stuff. And it's just like, let's just let go of that. Just whatever works, whatever we can make work. I mean, like even like that Meatless Monday thing, it's like a very small choice or a change can make a really huge difference, especially if like everybody on your block is doing it, or everybody in your town is doing that. Like the collective impact of that choice. So I think that's what this is about, is just making kind of some small choices. It doesn't have to be like all or nothing, or I mean, I think I've become so much more chill. Like I think I was much more aggressive about it, maybe like 10 years ago when I first got started. And now I'm just a little more, I mean, I think you mellow out as you age, obviously, but then also just life gets in the way. So you still want to be conscientious and intentional about the impact of on your health, on your community, on your state, on your country, um, within reason, without making yourself crazy, especially people who struggle with like perfectionism or just a feeling of over responsibility. I think it's more just we all have a little bit of part to play, and we just can do that to the best of our abilities for wherever we are in our life. So I do think there is some stuff that I probably was a lot more stringent about, and now, because even with like my food sensitivities, obviously I do feel better when I stick to that really strongly, and I'm not eating out in particular, but the last couple of months have been last couple of years also have just been really wild. And so, I try to choose places that are a little bit better, but it's never perfect, and you just do what you can. So, what else didn't work for you?
Well, some other things that haven't worked well, but I've figured out some other solutions, maybe, is like, for example, with a young child, they like to snack a lot. I mean, they're always wanting to eat. And, particularly if you have them around other kids. I mean, my child went to daycare, is in public schools, they always are like, oh, so and so is eating this cool snack. Like, I want to eat that. And that cool snack may come with lots of processed things and definitely not be organic, or definitely not be healthy, or definitely have lots of chemicals, or who knows what's in it. And may not be something I want to give them. And So it can be challenging, and I've tried to come up with ways. Sometimes I give into those, and sometimes I just buy the packaged snack and allow my daughter to have it. And then other times we try to come up with other solutions. And whenever possible, I've tried to feed my daughter organic, that it's a place of privilege that I can do this, but I will, so like maybe I've been able to feed her so many organic items and like the grass-fed milk that it's kind of funny. Like she'll try like some other milk that's not grass-fed and she'll know instantly that it's not the grass-fed milk, and she'll be like, Mom, this milk doesn't taste good. Because she's had like the organic grass-fed ones her whole life. So it's kind of interesting. Like she doesn't like a lot of processed foods, and I don't know if that's just her taste buds because I only have one child and I don't have anything to compare it to as far as like day in, day out. She doesn't like a lot of processed foods. I literally, like she's been given plenty of opportunities to eat them as she's gotten older here. She's 7. But she like rejects a lots of crackers, the things that come in a box, like she rejects them and declines them for healthier versions that we've bought at the natural grocery store or for fresh whole foods. And sometimes it's even been a little frustrating when I want her to eat something quickly, or when like, because it also means like she doesn't care for like the lunches that are served at the public school, because she prefers, the organic whole food. So we make her lunch every day, which is great. It's great. It's just, it's not as convenient for me to have to make a lunch every morning. So for example, like Lunchables are a big hit with kids. And she does get Lunchables every once in a while because I'm running behind. I know that I'm gonna have to like train a bunch of people really early in the morning. I had a really early morning meeting at work, so I'm just gonna buy her that Lunchable this one time. But most of the time, we make our own Lunchables. So we'll instead of buying that prepackaged meal, which comes with more packaging and more processed food, we'll maybe buy the healthier crackers or the organic or grass-fed meat or a non-meat alternative, something with protein in it. And we'll just create our own Lunchable, and I'll cut it into similar shapes and sizes as the actual Lunchable has it. It's just a homemade version of the Lunchable. And so as much as packaging we do use, that's been extra since I became a mother. I am relieved that sometimes we're able to give back a little by not buying that one Lunchable, and we made a Lunchable ourselves. Instead of, we do use sandwich bags, but my daughter brings them home and we wash them and reuse them. And we do try to use reusable bags as much as possible. So we try in little ways to preserve the packaging instead of just automatically throwing everything away. Using, instead of plastic spoons and forks, we use our regular silverware and just wash it and reuse it. So those kinds of things. So I guess that probably answered your question, what doesn't work? So I gave you what it doesn't work and what does work. What doesn't work is feeding her processed foods, but also then alternatively, we come up with our own versions of the processed foods a lot of times.
Yeah, well, and then in the long run too, if she's then will grow into an adult who prefers those foods she as an adult will be then using less waste herself
I hope
and
so.
making good
Um,
decisions.
well, and because we've had conversations like whoever is working in the cafeteria at the public school will try to throw away her stuff. So I invite her to have a conversation with them about the environment. And hey, at home, we save our sandwich bags because they can be reused more than once. So I'm trying to teach her to have a conversation with someone else about maybe someone else has never even thought of that before, because I think it's a natural instinct we just think about to automatically throw that away. Maybe no one else has, it's never even occurred to someone else that it could be reused again. So we just have that conversation. Another thing, I don't know if now is a good time to mention it or not, but I was going to mention that I think when it comes to food and children, at least my daughter, it's been really helpful. And I think you were having other eco chats about this. So Phil, stop me if this is bleeding over into some other topic, um, but gardening, and teaching about organic and an appreciation. So one thing about organic foods is that it is harder to grow, and being pesticide free and having an organic garden, I mean, it is harder to grow. And like, we have neighbors right next door to us, they put pesticides on everything. And so, and you know, they put pesticides on their grass, and you can see, I mean, there's weeds all over our grass. And then they have this like weed free area, and um, and so we have a pollinator garden, and we have weeds all over the place. And so I have a conversation with my daughter regularly, and then our roses, we frequently are treating our roses with non-pesticide ways. Um, if they have, you know, a black fungus or, you know, something like that. And then every year except this year, my vegetable and produce and fruit gardening has not gone well. I've been too busy at work, but I've made it a personal mission to teach my daughter. I wanted her to teach where food comes from so that she appreciates farmers and where our food, how our food grows, and that it comes from the seed, that it comes from a plant, that it doesn't just magically just appear in our grocery store, that someone works really hard um, for it somewhere, and how amazing it is that we even get this orange, this like when we have a storm in Oklahoma and it hurt our crops, my daughter will be like, "Mommy, look at your flowers," or "Look at, we do have a tomato plant right now." We're, like I said, my garden this year is really non-existent, but we've grown all sorts of things, from squash to strawberries to okra to onions, to, we have all sorts of herbs. For the past 4 years, we've had various produce, and so she's seen all sorts of things growing, and she'll be like, "Mom, look, the storms hurt our garden." I was like, "Can you imagine if you're a farmer and you had to rely on this for your livelihood, or if you were, you know?" And remember, we're growing an organic garden that is free from pesticides and free from chemicals. And we try to talk about the bugs and the worms and the earthworms, and we don't immediately kill every bug that enters our, we try not to kill any single bug, for that matter. And in fact, my daughter, it's really precious when she goes over to someone else's house and there's a spider or a fly, she'll be like, "Don't kill it," the first thing when she sees it. Because we talk about how a spider and an earthworm and a bug all have places in the garden, and that they help and to give nutrition to the soil, and that it's our part of life, and they can help our, we talk about the pollinators and how they're all important so that we get this beautiful produce that we have. And so I'm a little disappointed that I didn't prioritize growing a garden this year, but I think that it's helped my daughter appreciate uh, the vegetables and the fruit even more. And I mean, I've been to a grocery store and been in the checkout line, and the cashier doesn't know what kind of produce he or she is holding. and I've had to tell them. And so I just wanted to make sure my daughter knows all of her produce, and knows, I mean, that if you're on social media, you know that AI is like the biggest thing out there right now. And I've seen on gardening groups, just someone's just being silly, right? Like they're posting, like I saw a tree full of watermelons, but I seriously believe that people actually thought that some watermelons were growing on trees. Like there were actual comments, and that really concerns me. Um, that some people don't know where or how our food grows or where it comes from, and I think that that's actually the case. And so I think some of the first steps to appreciating even organic food is understanding where our food even comes from, and that it doesn't just magically appear in the grocery store. So
Yeah, or just understanding, or to be intentional about the food that you're buying and then consuming, to understand where it's coming from, and that there are impacts to, even, wherever your stuff is being grown, what are the impacts on that crop in terms of like climate change, storms that are coming through, wildfires, how much water does it need? I remember I did almond milk for a little bit of time, and then learned that they take a ton of water to grow. So I switched to a different kind. But that you're right, that takes an understanding of like, where do almonds come from? What type of conditions does it require to grow?
yes.
So that's a great point. Okay, anything else that you will feel like is important for kind of this food journey? I think that's a great point that you made about connecting the food that we're eating to our health, is another huge piece of this as well. The food that we're putting in our body. I'm still shocked thinking about like earlier, all the doctors that I went to and the procedures they had or whatever. And then, because I just got a new doctor. So she was sort of asking me about some of that stuff, like, oh, you had this test done or this procedure or whatever. And I was like, oh yeah, I had all that done. It just turns out that I have food sensitivities.
Yes.
And, hundreds of dollars, even thousands of dollars in procedures or whatever later, it's like, oh, I just need to pay attention to what food I'm putting in my body. So that's a great point.
No, I mean, if you want, there was a podcast. I used to read books, like actually like sit down with an actual hard book and read it and dedicate space and time to a physical book. And now I listen to books.
Mm-hmm.
It's rare that I have time to actually sit with a hard book, but there's a great podcast. It's one of those, you're not quite sure if it's a book or a podcast, but it's written by Dr. Joanne McMillan, and it's called Gutful, like Gutfull. And it's really great. It talks about how food, like, she really presents it in a way that's very visual and very unique and that I hadn't heard before. So like she'll like give, like in one podcast, like one episode, she'll talk about, like, let's talk about how a salad, how you're chewing it and then how it goes through your body. And then let's talk about how a hamburger, like you eat it and like what it does in your body. Like, let's go through step by step and play by play. And it was really fascinating. And she goes through in ways I had never heard anyone go through before, like how food impacts your body. That was really helpful to me. And then I guess the only other thing I would say is, because I always get, as we both have talked about, a little overwhelmed if I want to take an action step, is just like find one thing. Like you gave some great tips, like on going to Meatless Monday, or, just reusing a sandwich bag, or buying one thing that's organic. Don't try to like buy everything organic. Just buy one thing that's organic. Just find one thing instead of trying to do all the things. Like, just start there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. Well, thank you so much, friend, for having this conversation. This was fun.